The fluorescent lights in the adoption agency's waiting room hummed with the same nervous energy that had been building in my chest for weeks. I smoothed my best dress, a navy blue piece I'd bought secondhand but carefully altered to fit properly, and clutched the manila folder containing every document that proved I was worthy of being someone's mother. Ms. Rebecca Miller? The social worker's voice cut through my anxious thoughts. I stood up quickly, maybe too quickly, and followed her down a hallway lined with children's artwork. Each crayon masterpiece reminded me why I was here, why I'd spent the last 2 years jumping through every hoop the system had thrown at me. Mrs. Davidson's office was sterile in that particular way government buildings managed: beige walls, metal desk, motivational posters that had seen better days. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, and I sat down, placing my folder carefully on my lap. "I've reviewed your application," she began, and my heart hammered against my ribs. "Your background check came back clean. Your references speak highly of you, and your home study was adequate." Adequate. The word stung, but I kept my expression neutral. "However," she continued, and there it was, the word I'd been dreading, "the board has some concerns about your financial situation." I'd prepared for this. "I understand my income isn't as high as some applicants, but I'm stable. I work full-time at the marketing firm, I have savings, and I've budgeted carefully for it." "Ms. Miller." Her voice was patient but firm, the tone someone uses when they've made up their mind but want to appear fair. "You work as a receptionist. Your annual income is barely above the poverty line for a family of 2. Madison is a special case. She's been through trauma. She'll need therapy, possibly special education support. These things are expensive." Madison, 7 years old, auburn curls, eyes that seemed to hold too much sadness for someone so young. I'd met her during a group event for prospective adoptive families, and something had clicked between us immediately. She'd shown me her drawing of a house with 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, standing in front of it. "That's you and me," she'd whispered, "in our home. I can provide for her," I said, leaning forward. "I know it won't be luxury, but she'll have everything she needs. Love, stability, attention." "Love doesn't pay for medical bills," Mrs. Davidson interrupted, "or college tuition, or even basic necessities when an emergency arises." She pulled out another file. "We have a family, the Ashfords, who've also expressed interest in Madison. He's an investment banker. She's a doctor. They can offer her opportunities you simply can't." The words hit me like physical blows. I thought of my tiny apartment, carefully cleaned and childproofed. I thought of the books I'd bought, the small bedroom I'd painted yellow because Madison had mentioned it was her favorite color. I thought of the dreams I'd harbored for months, helping with homework at the kitchen table, bedtime stories, first days of school. "Please," I said, and I hated how my voice cracked. "Just give me a chance. I know I'm not wealthy, but I have so much love to give. I grew up poor, and yes, it was hard sometimes, but I turned out okay. I went to college on scholarships, I work hard." "I'm sorry, Ms. Miller. The decision has been made." Mrs. Davidson's expression wasn't unkind, but it was final. "The Ashfords will be Madison's new family." I sat there for a moment, letting the rejection wash over me. Then I stood up, gathered my folder, all those documents that apparently meant nothing, and walked toward the door. "Ms. Miller," Mrs. Davidson called after me. "For what it's worth, I think you would have been a good mother." But not good enough, I thought. Never good enough. The following weeks blurred together in a haze of grief I hadn't expected. I'd known rejection was possible, even likely, but I hadn't prepared for how completely it would devastate me. I threw myself into work, staying late at the marketing firm where I answered phones and filed paperwork for people who made more in a month than I made in a year. My supervisor, Betty, noticed my distraction. "Everything okay, Rebecca? You've been quieter than usual." "Just going through something," I mumbled, sorting through a stack of client files. "Want to talk about it?" I almost laughed. How could I explain that I'd been mourning the loss of a child who was never really mine? That I'd built an entire future in my head, only to have it crumble because my bank account wasn't impressive enough? "It's fine," I said instead. "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. I was angry, at the system, at the Ashfords, at myself for being naive enough to think love could overcome economics. The anger surprised me with its intensity. I'd always been the accommodating one, the one who smiled and nodded and tried to make everyone else comfortable. Now I felt something harder crystallizing inside me. One evening, I was walking home from work when I passed the community center where I'd volunteered for their after-school program. The same program where I'd first realized I wanted to be a mother, watching kids who needed extra attention and knowing I had it to give. Mrs. Johnson, the program coordinator, waved me over. "Rebecca, we've missed you. Are you okay? You seem different." Different? Yes, I supposed I was. "I'm fine," I said, the phrase becoming my default response. "Just busy." She studied my face with the knowing look of someone who'd worked with struggling families for years. "You know, there are other ways to make a difference in a child's life. If adoption didn't work out, how did you?" "Small community," she said gently. "Word gets around. I heard about Madison." The sound of her name still hurt. "The Ashfords will give her a good life. They can afford to. Money isn't everything, honey. Tell that to the adoption agency." Mrs. Johnson was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What if I told you there was a way to make sure no other woman had to go through what you went through? What if you could change the system instead of just letting it defeat you?" I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. "What do you mean? Go back to school. Get your degree in social work, or child psychology, or nonprofit management. Learn the system from the inside. Then change it." The idea seemed impossible. I can barely afford my rent, let alone college. Scholarships, grants, student loans. You found a way before. She put her hand on my arm. "You're smarter than they gave you credit for, Rebecca. Don't let them make you smaller than you are." That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by college brochures and financial aid applications. For the first time since the rejection, I felt something other than grief. I felt determined. Going back to school while working full-time was brutal. I took classes at night and on weekends, slowly chipping away at a degree in nonprofit management with a focus on child welfare policy. My social life, what little I'd had, disappeared completely. My coworkers started calling me the hermit because I turned down every invitation to happy hour or weekend plans. "You're going to burn yourself out," Betty warned me one afternoon as I rushed out to make it to my evening statistics class. "I'm fine," I said, grabbing my backpack. "That's what you always say. But Rebecca, you look exhausted. When's the last time you had fun? Went on a date?" I paused at the door. The truth was, I'd been on exactly 2 dates in the past 3 years, and both had ended badly when the men realized I had no interest in anything casual. I was building something, becoming someone, and I didn't have time for distractions. "I'm not looking for fun right now," I said. "I'm looking for purpose." The first year was the hardest. I survived on coffee and determination, studying in the break room during lunch, reading textbooks on the bus to and from work. My apartment became a fortress of textbooks, highlighted articles, and half-finished assignments. I learned to function on 4 hours of sleep and developed a strict schedule that left no room for spontaneity. My fellow students were mostly younger, fresh out of college with parents paying their tuition. I felt ancient at 28, sitting in the back of lecture halls with my secondhand laptop and carefully budgeted supplies. But I had something they didn't, a burning need to prove myself that kept me going when exhaustion threatened to derail me. The breakthrough came during my second semester in Dr. Thompson's policy analysis course. She'd assigned us to research a current social policy and propose reforms. While my classmates chose safe, well-documented topics, I dove headfirst into adoption discrimination based on economic status. I spent weeks in the library, poring over case studies and legislative records. I interviewed families who'd been rejected, social workers who'd seen the system's flaws, and advocates who were fighting for change. The more I researched, the more I realized how widespread the problem was. How many capable, loving families were being turned away because their bank accounts didn't meet arbitrary thresholds. My paper was 30 pages longer than the assignment required, filled with statistics, personal testimonies, and proposed legislative solutions. When Dr. Thompson handed it back with an A+ and a note requesting a meeting, my hands shook as I read her comments. "Your paper on income-based discrimination in adoption services was exceptional," she said when I met with her the following week. "Have you considered graduate school?" I almost laughed. "I'm barely managing undergrad. There are programs specifically designed for working adults. Full scholarships for students who want to work in child advocacy." She handed me a business card. "Think about it. The field needs people like you. People who understand the system's failures from personal experience." The business card sat on my kitchen table for weeks. Graduate school seemed impossible. More debt, more years of struggling, more time away from earning a decent living. But every time I considered throwing it away, I thought about Madison's face when she'd shown me that drawing. I thought about other children waiting for families that the system deemed unsuitable. Finally, on a rainy Tuesday evening after a particularly long day at work, I called the number on the card. Blue Ridge University Graduate Admissions, a cheerful voice answered. "Hi," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'd like to request information about your master's in social work program." That weekend, I found myself in a coffee shop near the university campus, meeting with Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the program director. She was younger than I'd expected, with kind eyes and an energy that immediately put me at ease. "Dr. Thompson speaks very highly of you," she said, reviewing my undergraduate transcript and the policy paper I'd brought along. "Your work shows exactly the kind of passionate advocacy we're looking for in our graduates." "I'm not sure I can afford." "Rebecca," she interrupted gently, "let me tell you about our Advocacy Scholars Program. It's designed specifically for students who've experienced systemic barriers firsthand and want to dedicate their careers to reform. Full tuition, living stipend, and guaranteed placement in a field internship." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. Full tuition? The program is funded by a grant from the Morrison Foundation. They believe that the best advocates are those who've lived the problems they're trying to solve. She leaned forward. "From what Dr. Thompson tells me, and from reading your work, you're exactly the kind of student we're looking for." The application process was intensive: essays, interviews, background checks, and references. But for the first time in years, I felt like the system was working for me instead of against me. When the acceptance letter arrived 3 months later, along with confirmation of my full scholarship, I sat on my apartment floor and cried. That weekend, I called Mrs. Johnson to share the news. "I knew you had it in you," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "That little girl you wanted to adopt? She's going to be so proud when she sees what you've become." My grades were excellent. I threw myself into every assignment with the intensity of someone who had something to prove. My professors noticed, but more importantly, my classmates began to see me as a resource rather than the older, out-of-place woman sitting in the back row. "You really know this stuff," said Amanda, a 23-year-old who'd initially seemed intimidated by my focus and determination. We were working on a group project about family preservation services, and I'd just finished explaining the intersection of poverty and child welfare. "I've lived it," I said simply. By my second year, I was teaching undergraduate courses as a graduate assistant, mentoring younger students, and conducting research with Dr. Thompson on adoption reform initiatives. The scared, apologetic woman who'd sat in Mrs. Davidson's office was becoming someone I barely recognized: confident, articulate, unafraid to challenge conventional wisdom. Something inside me had shifted permanently that day in Mrs. Davidson's office. I was no longer the woman who accepted rejection quietly. Graduate school was even harder than I'd expected, but I thrived in ways that surprised me. I wasn't just learning about policy and advocacy. I was learning to speak up, to challenge assumptions, to make my voice heard in rooms full of people who had initially dismissed me. The first time I presented research at a graduate student conference, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold my notes. But as I began speaking about the families I'd interviewed, parents who'd been deemed unfit because of their zip codes or their jobs, something clicked. This wasn't just academic theory. This was personal. "The current system," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, "forces children to wait in foster care, while perfectly loving families are rejected based on arbitrary financial criteria. We're not protecting children. We're protecting class privilege." The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, a prominent child welfare researcher from the University of North Carolina, approached me afterward. "That was powerful," she said. "Have you considered doctoral work? We need researchers who understand these issues from the inside." A doctorate seemed impossibly ambitious, but Dr. Walsh's words planted a seed. I began to see myself not just as someone trying to fix a broken system, but as someone who could fundamentally reshape how we think about families and worthiness. My thesis focused on reforming income-based criteria in adoption processes, and it caught the attention of several nonprofit organizations. I spent months conducting interviews with social workers, adoptive families, and children who'd aged out of the system. Each conversation reinforced my conviction that the current approach was fundamentally flawed. One interview particularly stayed with me. I spoke with David Martinez, a young man who'd spent his entire childhood in foster care because potential adoptive families were repeatedly rejected for minor financial shortcomings. I would have rather grown up poor with a family than comfortable in the system, he told me. Money can't replace love, but the system acts like it can. Before I'd even graduated, I had job offers from 3 different child advocacy groups. The irony wasn't lost on me. Organizations that once might have questioned my qualifications were now competing for my services. I chose the Blue Ridge Children's Alliance, an organization that lobbied for policy changes and provided legal support to families navigating the adoption system. My starting salary was more than double what I'd made as a receptionist, but more importantly, I was finally doing work that mattered. My supervisor, Dr. Patricia Coleman, was a veteran advocate who'd been fighting for children's rights for over 20 years. During my first week, she pulled me aside for what I expected to be a routine orientation meeting. "I've read your thesis," she said without preamble. "It's exactly the kind of work we need more of. But I want you to understand something. This job will be hard in ways you might not expect. You'll see families torn apart by bureaucracy. You'll watch children suffer because adults can't see past their own biases. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Madison, wondered where she was now, whether the Ashfords had given her the love she deserved. "I've been preparing for this my whole life," I said. My first major case involved a single father trying to adopt his girlfriend's daughter after the biological father abandoned them. The adoption agency had denied his application, citing his income and unmarried status. It felt like looking into a mirror of my own past. "They're saying I'm not stable enough," Jake told me during our first meeting. His daughter Lily clung to his hand, a bright 6-year-old with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. "But I've been raising Lily for 2 years. I'm the only father she's known." I spent 3 months building his case, documenting his relationship with Lily, gathering character references from teachers, neighbors, and coworkers. I learned about his work as a mechanic, his night classes and business management, his plans to propose to Lily's mother once the adoption was finalized. "Why is marriage so important to them?" Jake asked during one of our meetings. "We're committed to each other and to Lily. A piece of paper doesn't change that. Because the system equates traditional structures with stability," I explained. "It's one of many biases we're working to change." When we finally sat across from the review board, I wasn't the nervous woman who'd been dismissed years earlier. I was prepared, articulate, and absolutely unwilling to back down. "Mr. Williams has provided a stable, loving home for Lily for 2 years, I said, presenting our evidence with confidence I'd had to learn. "The agency's focus on income over actual parenting ability is not only discriminatory but harmful to the children it claims to protect." I presented testimony from Lily's teachers about Jake's involvement in her education, from neighbors about his character, from her pediatrician about the quality of care she received. I had financial records showing his steady employment and careful budgeting, character references from his evening professors, and a detailed plan for Lily's future education and care. But the most powerful moment came when Jake himself spoke. "I know I'm not rich," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion I could see in his eyes. "I can't promise Lily private schools or fancy vacations. But I can promise her that she'll never doubt she's loved, that she'll always have someone in her corner, that she'll grow up knowing she's valued for who she is, not what she has." We won. Lily got to stay with the only father she'd known, and I got my first taste of real victory. The board's unanimous decision felt like vindication not just for Jake and Lily, but for every family that had been dismissed because their love couldn't be quantified in dollars. After the hearing, Jake hugged me tightly. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for seeing what they couldn't." Word spread quickly in the small world of family law. More cases came my way, more families who'd been failed by a system that prioritized economics over love. With each success, I felt myself becoming someone I barely recognized, confident, assertive, unafraid to fight. But it was the failures that taught me the most. The cases where we couldn't overcome the system's biases, where children remained in care because potential parents didn't meet arbitrary criteria. These losses fueled my determination to create broader change, to move beyond individual cases to systemic reform. 5 years after starting at the Alliance, I was promoted to Director of Advocacy. My work had resulted in policy changes in 3 states, and I'd become a go-to expert for journalists writing about adoption reform. When the organization's board decided to create a new position, Chief Policy Officer, they offered it to me without hesitation. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase and the opportunity to expand our work nationally. More importantly, it gave me a platform to address the very issues that had derailed my own adoption attempt years earlier. I was featured on the cover of Nonprofit Quarterly, speaking at conferences, testifying before legislative committees. The scared, apologetic woman who'd sat in Mrs. Davidson's office was gone, replaced by someone who commanded attention and respect. It was during this period of professional triumph that I received an unexpected email. "Ms. Miller," it began, "my name is Madison Ashford. You don't know me, but I've been following your work on adoption reform. I have a story I think you should hear, and I believe we met once, many years ago, when I was a child in the system." My hands shook as I read the message. Madison. My Madison, though she'd never really been mine. She wanted to meet for coffee to discuss a potential case, she said. She was now a lawyer herself, working for a firm that specialized in family law. She'd seen my name in an article about our latest legislative victory and remembered me from that group event so many years ago. I stared at the email for a long time before responding. "Yes," I wrote back. "I'd be happy to meet." The coffee shop Madison had chosen was upscale, the kind of place where a single drink cost more than I used to spend on lunch. I arrived early, ordering a simple coffee and finding a table near the window where I could watch for her arrival. I recognized her immediately, though she'd grown into a poised young woman of 22. The auburn curls were tamed into a professional style, and she wore a tailored suit that spoke of success and confidence. But her eyes, those expressive green eyes that had haunted my memories, were exactly the same. She spotted me and approached with a warm smile. "Ms. Miller? Thank you so much for meeting with me. Please, call me Rebecca," I said, standing to shake her hand. "And thank you for reaching out. I have to admit, I'm curious about what brought you to me." Madison settled into her chair, studying my face with an intensity that made me slightly uncomfortable. "I remember you," she said finally. "From that adoption event when I was 7. You were so kind to me, and I drew you that picture of the house," I finished, "with the 2 stick figures. You remember." Her smile was genuine now, touched with something that looked like wonder. "I kept hoping you'd adopt me. When the Ashfords were chosen instead, I was heartbroken. The admission hit me harder than I'd expected. I wanted to," I said quietly. "They said I wasn't financially suitable." "Yes, I know." Madison's expression grew serious. "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. The Ashfords were. They provided for me financially. Yes. Private schools, tutoring, college tuition. But they were cold, Rebecca. Distant. They treated me more like a project than a daughter." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo, herself in a graduation cap and gown, flanked by a stern-looking couple who barely smiled at the camera. "They never really understood me," Madison continued. "When I expressed interest in family law, they pushed me toward corporate work because it paid better. When I wanted to focus on child advocacy, they threatened to cut off support. Everything was about status and money. I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. I'm sorry you went through that. Don't be sorry. It taught me something important, that the system that deemed you unfit to be my parent was fundamentally flawed." Madison leaned forward, her eyes bright with passion. "I became a lawyer specifically to change these policies. I've been working on cases just like yours, and when I saw your name in that article, I knew I had to reach out." "What kind of cases?" "I'm representing a woman whose adoption application was denied because she's a single teacher. Another case involves a couple who were rejected because they rent instead of own their home." Sound familiar? It sounded exactly like the work I'd been doing, but from the legal side rather than the policy side. "There's something else," Madison said, her voice taking on a different tone. "My firm is expanding their family law division, and they're looking for someone to head their new advocacy department. Someone with policy experience who understands the system's failures from personal experience." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a partnership," Madison said. "A chance to change the system that failed both of us, but from a position of real power. The salary would be significant. More than significant." She named a figure that made my breath catch. It was 3 times what I was making at the Alliance, with benefits and resources I could only dream of. "Why me?" I asked. Madison's smile was soft, tinged with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "Because you were the first adult who saw me as more than a burden or a charity case. Because you wanted me when I was just a scared little girl with nothing to offer. And because you've spent the last decade proving that they were wrong about you." I asked for time to think about Madison's offer, but deep down, I knew I was going to say yes. Not just because of the money or the career opportunity, but because it felt like coming full circle. When I gave my notice at the Alliance, my colleagues were surprised but supportive. "You've accomplished everything you set out to do here," my supervisor said. "It's time for you to spread your wings." The transition to Morrison Hayes and Associates was smoother than I'd expected. Madison had been right about the resources. I had a team of researchers, unlimited access to expert witnesses, and a budget that allowed us to take on cases we might never have pursued at the Alliance. My first day, Madison knocked on my office door. It was a spacious corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that cost more than my first car. "How does it feel?" she asked, settling into one of the chairs across from my desk. "Surreal," I admitted. 15 years ago, I was told I wasn't good enough to be your mother because I didn't have enough money. Now you're my boss, and I'm making more in a month than I used to make in a year. Madison was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something?" she said finally. I nodded. "I never stopped thinking about you. Even with the Ashfords, even through private school and college. I remembered that day when you saw my drawing and your face just lit up. You looked at me like I was precious, like I mattered." Her voice grew thick with emotion. "The Ashfords never looked at me that way." "Madison, I'm not finished," she said gently. "When I decided to become a lawyer, it wasn't just about changing the system. It was about finding you again. I wanted to prove that their assessment was wrong, that you were exactly the kind of parent I needed." I felt tears pricking my eyes. "You became successful in spite of not having me, not because of it." "No," Madison said firmly. "I became successful because of the love you showed me in those few brief encounters. You planted something in me that day, the knowledge that I was worthy of being chosen, of being wanted. The Ashfords gave me financial security, but you gave me something much more valuable. You gave me the belief that I deserved better." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two women who had been shaped by the same systemic failure, but had found their way to each other anyway. "So," Madison said, her tone lightening, "ready to change the world?" I smiled, feeling more ready than I'd ever been. "Let's do it." 3 months into my new position, I received a call that brought everything full circle. Mrs. Davidson, the social worker who had rejected my adoption application all those years ago, was on the line. "Ms. Miller? This is Margaret Davidson from Child and Family Services. I hope you remember me." Remember her? I'd thought about her every day for years. "Of course, Mrs. Davidson. What can I do for you?" "I'm calling because we have a situation here, and frankly, you're the only person I trust to handle it properly." Her voice sounded older, tired. "We have a family, the Hunts, who are trying to adopt siblings. 2 little girls, ages 6 and 8. The family meets all our emotional and stability criteria, but their income falls just short of our guidelines." I gripped the phone tighter. "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to represent them. Pro bono, if necessary. These girls have been in the system for 2 years, and the Hunts are perfect for them in every way except the financial one. I've seen what happens when we prioritize money over love, and I don't want to make that mistake again." The admission hung in the air between us. Mrs. Davidson was acknowledging, without quite saying it, that she'd been wrong about me all those years ago. "Tell me about the family," I said. "Tom Hunt is a teacher at the elementary school, and his wife Sarah works part-time as a library aide. They have a modest home, a stable marriage of 12 years, and they've been foster parents to these girls for the past 8 months. The girls call them Mama and Daddy already." I closed my eyes, seeing echoes of my own story in theirs. "And the agency's concerns?" "The same ones we had with you," Mrs. Davidson said quietly. "Their combined income is just below our threshold. The board is worried about college tuition, medical expenses, extracurricular activities." "What about the girls? What do they want?" "That's just it. They're desperate to stay with the Hunts. The older girl, Amber, wrote a letter to the judge begging not to be moved again. She says she finally feels safe." That afternoon, I drove to meet the Hunt family at their home in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Tom Hunt answered the door, a tall, gentle-faced man in his 30s with paint-stained fingers and kind eyes. Sarah was smaller, with graying brown hair and a warm smile that reminded me of Mrs. Johnson from the community center. "Thank you for coming," Sarah said, ushering me into their living room. The space was clean but clearly lived in, with children's artwork on the refrigerator and toys neatly organized in baskets. 2 little girls peeked shyly around the corner, Amber, 8 years old with serious dark eyes, and her sister Emma, 6, who had her thumb in her mouth and clutched a worn stuffed rabbit. "Girls, this is Ms. Miller," Tom said gently. "She's here to help us become a real family." Amber stepped forward with the solemnity of a child who'd learned not to trust easily. "Are you going to take us away?" she asked. My heart broke a little. "I'm here to help you stay," I said, kneeling to her level. Tell me, what do you like about living here? Tom, I mean, Daddy, helps me with my math homework every night, Amber said, glancing back at Tom for permission to continue. And Mama Sarah makes the best pancakes, and she reads to us before bed, and they never yell at us when we make mistakes. Emma nodded vigorously. And they said we can get a puppy when we're really their kids forever. As I talked with the family, I learned about Tom's dedication to his students, how he stayed after school to tutor kids who were struggling. I learned about Sarah's volunteer work at the local food bank, her gentle way with children who'd experienced trauma. I saw how the girls had blossomed in their care, how they'd gone from withdrawn and fearful to laughing and secure. I'll take the case, I said without hesitation. Thank you. And Rebecca, Mrs. Davidson had said when I'd called her back that evening, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you. Completely wrong. The Hunt case became our flagship advocacy effort. Madison and I worked together seamlessly, combining legal strategy with policy reform arguments. We didn't just want to win this case. We wanted to establish precedent that would prevent future families from facing the same discrimination. Madison threw herself into the research with the same passion I'd felt years earlier. Look at this, she said one evening, staying late to go through case files. In the past 5 years, this agency has approved 17 families with household incomes above $75,000, but only 3 with incomes below $50,000. Even when all other factors were equal. That's our smoking gun, I said. Clear evidence of economic discrimination. We assembled a comprehensive case that went far beyond the Hunt's individual circumstances. We documented patterns of bias, interviewed families who'd been rejected, and gathered testimony from child development experts about the importance of stability over wealth. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Amber's serious little face, about Emma's trust that we would keep her family together. I thought about Madison at 7 years old, drawing her picture of our future home. I thought about all the children still waiting because the system valued bank accounts over love. The hearing was held in the same building where I'd been rejected 15 years earlier, but this time, I walked in as a respected advocate with a team of lawyers behind me and media attention focused on our case. Local reporters had picked up the story, and several adoption reform organizations had submitted supporting briefs. Mrs. Davidson was still there, now nearing retirement, and she nodded respectfully when she saw me. But the decision-makers were different people, and they listened carefully as Madison and I presented our case. The current income requirements, I argued, are based on arbitrary financial thresholds that don't account for actual parenting ability or emotional stability. They systematically discriminate against working-class families while prioritizing wealth over love. I presented evidence of the agency's pattern of decisions, expert testimony about child development and attachment, and financial analysis showing that the Hunt's careful budgeting actually demonstrated better financial responsibility than some higher-earning families. Madison followed with the legal precedents, citing cases we'd won and policy changes we'd influenced. The evidence shows that children thrive in loving, stable homes regardless of their parents' income level, she said. To deny these children the family they've bonded with based solely on income is not in their best interest. It's harmful to their development and well-being. The most powerful moment came when we played a video message from Amber. She'd asked to speak directly to the judge, and her words carried the weight of lived experience. Your Honor, she said, her 8-year-old voice clear and determined, I know what it's like to not have a real family. I've lived in 5 different places, and nobody ever wanted to keep me and Emma forever. But Tom and Sarah, they love us. They help us with our homework and read us stories and make us feel safe. Please don't make us leave. We don't need fancy things. We just need them. Together, we painted a picture of a system that needed fundamental reform. The Hunts were approved unanimously. When the judge announced the decision, Sarah Hunt burst into tears, and Tom wrapped his arms around both girls. Amber looked directly at me and mouthed, "Thank you." After the hearing, Mrs. Davidson approached me in the hallway. "You've become everything I thought you could be," she said. "I just wish I'd been wise enough to see it then." "We all make mistakes," I said, and meant it. "What matters is that we learn from them." "There's something else," she said, looking suddenly older than her years. "I've been thinking about retiring, but I wanted to tell you. I've recommended that the agency adopt new guidelines based on your research. Income will still be a factor, but it won't be the determining factor. The focus will be on stability, commitment, and the child's best interests. It was a small victory in the larger war, but it felt monumental. The system that had failed me was finally beginning to change, one policy at a time. The success of the Hunt case led to national attention and invitations to speak at conferences across the country. Madison and I were featured in Time magazine as the advocates changing America's adoption system, and our firm's advocacy department became a model for other practices. But the real victory came 6 months later, when Madison knocked on my office door with news that made everything we'd accomplished feel secondary. "Rebecca," she said, her face glowing with excitement, "I have something to tell you." I looked up from the case files I'd been reviewing. "Good news, I hope." "The best news." She sat down across from my desk, practically bouncing with energy. "My adoption was never finalized." I stared at her, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "The Ashfords, they adopted me provisionally, but they never completed the final paperwork. Something about wanting to make sure I was a good fit first." Madison's voice was bitter for a moment, then brightened again. "Which means, legally, I'm still available for adoption." "Madison, you're 22 years old. Adult adoption is completely legal," she interrupted. "I've done the research. If you're willing, if you want to, we could make it official. You could finally be my mother." The words hit me like a physical force. After all these years, after building careers and changing systems and proving ourselves worthy, we'd come back to the most basic truth. We belong together. "Are you sure?" I asked, though my heart was already answering for me. "I've never been more sure of anything." Madison reached across the desk and took my hands. "You were my mother from the moment you looked at my drawing and saw our future. The paperwork will just make it legal." The adoption ceremony was small, just Madison and me, our lawyer, and a judge who seemed charmed by our unusual story. When it was over, when the papers were finally signed, Madison hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For never giving up. For becoming the person I needed you to be. For proving that they were wrong about both of us." I held her close, this daughter I'd loved for 15 years without the legal right to call her mine. "Thank you for finding your way back to me." My office at Morrison, Hayes & Associates has changed over the years. The walls are now covered with photos, families we've helped unite, children we've kept with parents who love them, policy victories that have changed lives across the country. But my favorite photo sits on my desk, Madison and me at her wedding last year, both of us beaming as she marries a man who loves her completely and treats her like the treasure she's always been. In the photo, she's holding my hand, and we're both wearing matching bracelets that say Chosen Family. The work continues. We've helped change adoption policies in 15 states, established precedent in dozens of cases, and created a fellowship program that provides legal support to families who can't afford representation. The foundation we started, the Madison Miller Foundation for Family Justice, has grown beyond our wildest dreams. But the real success isn't measured in policy changes or legal victories. It's measured in moments like this morning, when Madison stopped by my office with coffee and stayed to tell me about her plans for the weekend, her hopes for the future, her everyday joys and concerns. "Mom," she said as she was leaving, using the title that still makes my heart skip a beat, even after 5 years of legal recognition. "I love you. I love you too, sweetheart." As I watch her walk down the hallway, confident and successful and kind, I think about that scared woman who sat in Mrs. Davidson's office 15 years ago. She thought she was losing everything, but she was actually beginning the journey that would give her more than she'd ever dreamed possible. Sometimes the system fails us, but if we're brave enough to fight back, if we're determined enough to become more than they said we could be, we can fail the system right back. We can prove them wrong in ways they never saw coming. Madison was never too good for me. I was always good enough for her. It just took the world a little time to catch up to what we knew in our hearts from the very beginning. We were meant to be family. We always were.